Hello and welcome to Hosting HR with me, Leon Morley, founder of HR Recruitment Solutions. We're currently live across Facebook, LinkedIn, and also onto YouTube. And you can certainly get involved in the show today by making your comments and asking any questions of our panel. What are we discussing today? So we're going to be discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion matters. And we'll introduce to the panel shortly. But before we do, I just want to say a big happy birthday to Naomi Asher. Naomi, and here's Naomi and I. So Naomi is our non-executive director of HR Recruitment Solutions, and she's celebrating, I think she said it was her 21st birthday, but I'm sure she said that a few other years as well. So I'm not sure if that's definitely true. But yeah, welcome and to everybody out there, and happy birthday to Naomi as well. So, shall we start with introductions then? So, Heidi, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you, Leon. Good evening, or maybe even good day. I should say if you're dialing in from another time zone. So my name is Heidi Robertson. I am Group Head of Diversity and Inclusion at ABB. And for those of you who do not know that much about ABB, ABB is actually a leading global technology company with around 105,000 talented employees operating in more than 100 countries. I started in ABB as a management trainee in 2001 and has been there now then for 20 years and moved into various roles on local, regional, and then global level. Responsible for diversity and inclusion globally since 2018, and last year we proudly launched the historical Diversity and Inclusion Strategy 2030 with an ambition of inclusion of all and equality across all dimensions. On a personal note, I live in Norway, I am married, and I have 3 children, and I'm very excited to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you. We're very happy to have you here. Perrine, you made it from Birmingham. I think you were talking today.
Yeah, I was supposed to be late to this. I'm so glad I made it. I took the early train from Birmingham, so glad to be here today.
Cool. So introduce yourself, please.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here today. Leon and us have been preparing this for a while. I'm super excited to be here today. My name is Perrine Fark. I'm a professional keynote speaker and an author of a book called Inclusion, The Ultimate Secret for an Organization's Success. And I am the founder of Inspired Human, and I help organizations create more inclusive workplaces. Short story, how did I end up doing this? I've been working for the last 15 years in technology companies or software technology vendors. And as a woman, as a mother in a very straight white male environment, I often felt excluded and like I did not belong. I couldn't see anyone who looked like me, who was clearly succeeding in that field, in the technology space. I worked for organizations including Facebook and PagerDuty and lots of tech companies. So I decided I wanted to change this and use my personal experience as a positive catalyst for change. So now I help organizations create more inclusive spaces, and I do that through keynote speaking. I actually was delivering a keynote today in Birmingham at the Internet Retail Expo. That's why I was supposed to be late, but I'm not late, which is great. And I also deliver workshops on different topics, including inclusive language, microaggressions, etc. But also I consult and I help organizations. And I work with a lot of HR professionals, and I coach them as well on how to have the foundations on diversity and inclusion. So super excited to be here today. And by the way, I'm originally from France, born and bred in France, moved to Italy a few years ago, and now I live in the UK in London, and I have 2 kids and 1 Italian husband. I don't know why I said Italian husband, but I thought you wanted to know.
Very international. It's not Lyon you're from, is it?
I'm from not too far. I'm not too far from Lyon. Okay. I'm from Dijon, which is not too far from Lyon.
Okay. Sabah, please, tell us about yourself.
Hi everyone, so I'm an HR inclusion consultant and I provide strategic advisory, inclusion mentoring, and I develop bespoke solutions for authentic, ethical leaders and HR directors and their teams, particularly those from white dominant groups and leads who kind of want to move past their limiting belief systems, and they're really serious about inclusion and learning with humility. So I now intentionally pick and choose who I work with. I've been lucky to have grown up in Dubai. I'm from Delhi originally, and I have about 20 years of experience doing predominantly HR business partnering. I've worked internationally across the UK, UAE, India, US, and several strategic and culture change projects in multiple industries and sectors. And I've worked with more than 200 different nationalities, which has given me a very unique insight into what it means to be an expat, into what it means to be an outsider, into what it means to be a woman of color with lots of different intersecting identities, married to somebody who's white British. And having moved to the UK a few years ago, I've become more deeply embedded into race and inclusion work. And that's a lot of what I do these days. So this year has been predominantly race equity work creation for universities and lots of different healthcare sectors and charities. So lovely to be here and so glad to be given this opportunity to speak with all of you on this panel that Leon's organised.
Thank you, Sabah. Yeah, it's very international, which is what I like, because we get people watching from all over. So that's fantastic. Certainly, when I looked at some of the podcast sort of figures, we had more people that listened to that in the US than anywhere else. So it does seem to go very internationally. So for those that watch Hosting HR, they'll be very familiar with a game that we play at this point. But we like to get to know all of our guests in a slightly different way. So we're going to be playing a game called 2 Lies and 1 Truth. So this game is where each of our panelists will tell us 3 facts about themselves, 2 of which are outright lies, and 1 is in fact a truth. So we may as well go in the same order. So Heidi, please do tell us your, and we'll reveal at the end. We don't reveal now. So please tell us your 3 facts, Heidi.
Okay, I hope you're ready for my 3 facts. 1, I participated in the Olympic Games in Lillehammer 1994. 2, my origins are from the US. And 3, I have lived in 10 different countries.
Interesting. I feel like all of those could be right. So they're very good. Perrine?
Yes. Okay, so let me give you the 3 truths about me.
Yeah.
1 truth is that I'm a bodybuilder. Another one is I'm a vegan who does not drink alcohol. And another one is I speak fluent Russian.
Oh, interesting. I'm not sure about the first one.
No,
I'm not getting that impression.
For sure.
If you are, it's possible because you
Yeah.
might be incredibly lean and incredibly strong. But yeah, okay. Sabah?
Okay, so I have mixed heritage. I'm studying for a career transition and I'm related to a very famous politician.
What was your second one?
I'm studying for a career transition.
Okay.
And I'm related to a very famous politician.
Related to a famous politician. Okay, cool, great. Interesting, very, very interesting facts, guys. Certainly looking forward to the reveal at the end of the show. But let's talk a little bit more about obviously what we're here for. So I have to be honest, this is really not an area of my expertise, and that's why obviously you guys are here. So I may ask some questions that might be a little bit, what you might consider a little bit silly or stupid, and I just apologize in advance for any of those. But sometimes it's just for me to understand, and certainly if you're an audience member out there, you don't need to feel silly about asking any questions, because I'm sure mine will be more silly. So I'd like to start a little bit with just really understanding what we mean when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because certainly I've heard those words bandied around. Sometimes they seem to mean very much something around gender. Sometimes equity was kind of a newish word to me. It was always diversity and inclusion. So there's lots of things in my mind. I don't even necessarily fully understand what we mean when we're talking about those 3 things. So I wondered if perhaps Sabah, could you maybe break them down for me in terms of what each of those things refer to?
Yeah, sure. I'll share what it means to me. It might be that other people have different definitions or understand it differently. For me, equity is the link between embracing diversity and creating inclusion, because without understanding the nuances of why equality does not equate to equity, which is, you need, everybody starts at different points, everybody starts with different barriers. And so you have to have a very nuanced understanding of equity creation. And I think for me, it is making sure that we are listening and doing work reflecting all those nuances and making sure we're creating those spaces for different people where diversity can thrive, and therefore where people feel like they belong, and so therefore they feel included. So that's how those three concepts relate for me.
So diversity is very much lots of different people is what we're kind of referring to.
I think diversity is everything. Diversity is natural. Diversity is not just all our multiple complex identities, but diversity is how we think, how we act, how we behave, what we believe, where we're from. And, it's the mix of all of this that we bring to ourselves, whether we engage in society, socially, at workplaces, and so on. So diversity is all those unique to create these kind of spaces even. It's, when I'm talking, I'm not assuming that and Leon think me and they agree, and space for disagreement. So for me, diversity is accepting that difference is natural, it's normal, and it's non-binary.
Okay. How is it defined at ABB? Because I assume, Heidi, that you define what diversity and inclusion and diversity, equity and inclusion is there. How do you define it there?
Yeah, and I think it's very often, diversity and inclusion, most people understand what that is. So diversity, more of the demographics. So you have the gender, you have the ethnicity and so on, the age, and you can actually count it, and you say, okay, we're going to measure, we're going to follow up, and so on. That's one part. But we are not succeeding only through diversity, through counting how many women, how many men, how many of this origin, and so on. We also need to make sure we have an inclusive culture where people come to work and they feel they belong, they feel respected, and they feel heard. And in between here, as Sabah was saying, we need to ensure that the structures are ensuring equity. So I think one very nice way of looking at it, almost like a metaphor, is if you think about a football field and there is a fence and you have this tall person and you have this short person. If we put both of them in front of that fence, the short person cannot see. Let's put them in a chair so that person is equally high and can see the game. Like we do, for example, with accessibility to buildings. We need to have a way for people with wheelchair to get into the building. And that's the equity, to ensure a structure where it's actually possible to have the equal opportunities. So that's how I would define it and explain it.
Oh, fantastic. That's helpful. Perrine, would you say anything? Does that kind of cover that, or
yeah, I would definitely echo on what Sabah and Heidi said. Great definitions. And I also want to acknowledge, by the way, great question, Leon, to start. And I'll tell you why, because I was reading a stat the other day that was saying that 55% of people are too scared to talk about diversity and inclusion in the workplace for fear of saying the wrong thing. That's something I see a lot in my workshops with my clients, where when we even start talking about diversity and inclusion and the very basic definitions, a lot of executives, leaders, managers are too scared to say the wrong thing. Like you said at the start, like, forgive me if I ask stupid questions because I don't really know too much. So I want to acknowledge we're all on the same boat. There is no, and I think sometimes we live in a very self-righteous time where people feel they have to have the perfect wording and the perfect way of saying things on social media. Otherwise they're going to get, lots of negative comments. You shouldn't say this, you shouldn't say that. So let's acknowledge we're all work in progress. There is no one is born being the perfect, diversity and inclusion like ambassador and advocate, right? We're all learning. So I want to start by acknowledging, like, this is great that you ask these questions because a lot of us are scared to talk about it. And the other thing I wanted to acknowledge that the actual definition, I think, of diversity and inclusion has actually evolved a lot, especially over the last few years. Like, if you think 20 years ago, when we talked about diversity and inclusion in the workplace, like Heidi mentioned, it was very much about gender diversity, I believe. And then over the last few years, with Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, and other, LGBT plus pride, etc. Nowadays, the definition is not just gender diversity or ethnic diversity, but also religious diversity, age diversity, disability, sexual orientation, neurodiversity. We even talk about introverts and extroverts. So it's acknowledging that in the workplace, we want to represent the wide range of individuals that are shaping today's society. That's the main thing. And when it comes to inclusion, it's a hard concept to define. I love Gartner's definition of inclusion. They say that inclusion in the workplace can be measured by looking at a few things like fair treatment, integrating differences, decision-making, psychological safety, which is one of my favorite topics, trust, belonging, and diversity. So hopefully these definitions help our listeners understand a bit what we're talking about. Essentially, like Heidi said really well, I think we're trying to achieve an environment, a workplace where people feel like they belong, not just, the visible diversity. I can see there are men and women and disabled individuals and people with different ethnic background. That's great, but we also want to make sure all those people feel so safe, psychological safe, that they can be fully included in decision making, etc. So that's sort of my take on it. And I'm simply echoing on what Sabah and Heidi said earlier, which I just think the definition has changed a little bit, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And maybe to jump in there, Perrine, also what you said about people being a bit afraid. Oh, am I saying something wrong? Maybe I shouldn't say something because maybe I'll offend someone. And that's very often something that we see this kind of fear of leaning into this unknown and what is different to us, because what if that person feels offended? What if I say something wrong? And I think with that, all of us, the listeners, the viewers, everyone, let's have that in mind when we approach and meet colleagues and new people, that let's assume positive intent. Sometimes you say something and you absolutely do not mean to hurt or harm anyone, but the other person in front of you might take it in the wrong way. But then we are not evolving if we are constantly kind of being offensive.
Don't talk about it.
So we need to dare to talk about it and feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and on that note, sorry, Leon, I'm just jumping. I just think this is such an interesting topic to start the conversation. I just want to talk about that topic, which is, I know it's a bit polemic, but let's we just talk about being uncomfortable. Like the whole woke culture or the whole cancel culture. Now, I said earlier, I feel sometimes we live in a very self-righteous time where people are so scared of saying the wrong thing or saying not the right words or saying the wrong thing to a point where they feel scared, and that kind of it's almost divisive. And I think sometimes when I read on social media, people are saying you shouldn't say this, you shouldn't say that, this is the right way to say it, this is the right way to say it. I feel this is creating additional fear, and this is not helping the conversation. I think if someone said something, maybe they offended someone, but clearly not intentionally, they offended someone. My approach, rather than saying, you didn't say the right thing, this is bad, I would say, right, one thing you can do next time is maybe think about this, what do you think? And I say, okay, fair enough, I didn't realize, right? Okay, thank you, I've learned, moving on. Rather than sort of jumping on that and saying, you should never have said, how dare you? I feel sometimes it's very divisive. And it's counterproductive. And I understand where those people come from. I understand the anger and the upset. I get that. But I believe that if we approach an issue by being, over anger, over self-righteous, that can backfire. So in my workshops, I always try to create a safe environment to learn. This is a safe space to learn. There is no wrong question. There is no stupid question. There is no finger pointing or blaming. It's okay to ask any question. So just wanted to talk about this concept of, self-righteous and woke culture or cancel culture. And just keen to hear what everybody here is thinking about this.
If I can come in there, I agree with you, Perrine. I think it's not helpful when we cancel people. I think one of the perspectives we should be considerate of, and I hear everything that you and Heidi have said, but I'm a woman of color that works to advocate and uplift on behalf of several different racial groups. And I can tell you that intent, whether it's intended or not, causes harm and hurt. And I think we all absolutely need to lead from a place of empathy and humility. And this is the work I do with senior white leaders, because they need safe one-to-one spaces to actually go on their inclusion journey, because it's not safe always for them and they don't know what to say and they are struggling. And as you said, Leon, they are worried about getting it so wrong that very often they're just split between disengagement and like a deer in the headlights, or they go all out and they say completely wrong things, and then we're doing a lot of, damage control. Neither state is helpful, and nobody learns through shame and guilt. I do think there's, the way cancel culture started, I think it came from a good place, from accountability, people wanting accountability to be taken by those who belong to a majority group. And I am speaking today to some of you who may belong to a majority group, but also to a white minoritized group. And this can be quite a difficult dynamic to navigate. So definitely, I think we need brave space conversations, which is what safe spaces were always meant to be, but which very quickly became into safe spaces where we either listened to only one racial group that was perhaps, very upset, rightfully so, or it became spaces where we ended up coddling and not actually addressing the difficult things we do need to discuss. And, as you said, Heidi, we need to get comfortable with the way past this space we're in. But I do feel like, there are peaks and troughs in how culture develops and evolves. And I think, cancel culture is part of that peak. At some point, we're going to reach a place where we get into these spaces, where these conversations are happening a lot more, where we're able to come at it not from a place of anger, but respect racial stress. We are able to respect racial trauma. And I think when people start to believe that a lot, especially people of color, and I think that will change the narrative. But you have to understand that I think the people often that come out from either side are coming either from a place of pain or a place of fear, because that's what's making it divisive. They're fearful that, they're going to have to change and accept these woke ideas. Wokeness isn't bad in itself, but I think any extreme of any idea will create, no progress. So I absolutely hear what you're saying.
It's obviously quite clear that the discussion definitely needs to happen. So I mean, one of the things that I know the CIPD have changed how they refer to it. So diversity inclusion was very much the words. They've switched it round, and they now call it inclusion and diversity. And I asked them, why have you done that? And they said that they just felt that that was the way round it should be, and that it's always been the wrong way round. And so they've completely changed. Obviously, the CIPD in the UK are, very much responsible for a lot of the way that the HR profession works and likes to move the HR profession forward. So I thought that was quite interesting that they switched it round. But one of the things that I know, Perrine in particular, this is something that you talk a lot about in terms of the sort of business case. I'm intrigued by this because obviously the sort of ethical and moral case, I think, is there. I think you'd like to think that most people are in agreement that we should have a fair sort of working establishments and organizations and companies, and that everybody should be supported, and certainly those that have perhaps historically been disadvantaged should get there. But what's the business reason why business leaders should be taking more attention to this than they are?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love that you're asking this. Because in my experience, essentially the people who will move the needle in the business are the leaders, the people with power, authority, and influence. So if we want to move the needle when it comes to anything in the business, we need to speak to the leaders, the CEOs, the executive team, etc. Otherwise, things won't significantly change. And by knowing that, the key thing is to speak their language, right? So a busy CEO, if you think about a busy CEO, busy running a company of 100, 500,000 of employees, they have a lot on their mind. They have, pressure and goals to reach for the company. So if we can speak their language, I think that's when we can get their attention and their buy-in and their commitments. So when I think about diversity and inclusion, there is a clear business case, right? So from McKinsey to Boston Consulting Group to Gallup, to Harvard Business Reviews, all the research is showing there is a strong correlation between a very inclusive and diverse team, executive team, and more innovation, more revenue from innovation, better employee engagement, less turnover, more productivity, more employee morale, right? So if we can use these words and show the correlation between a diverse team, an inclusive team, and great ROI for the business, then we're going to get the commitment, the buy-in from the CEO and the commitment from the CEO, and we're going to get the influence and the authority and the power to move things. If there was a study the other in December last year around the Chief Diversity Officer, which is a new role, which, by the way, has been chief diversity officers, the role has increased by 120% over the last year after Black Lives Matter. So companies like ABB or others are hiring more chief diversity officers, which is a great thing. But this role has one of the highest turnovers ever. Why do chief diversity officers change so much? Because I believe is they don't often they're hired to fix the issue of diversity inclusion, but they're not given the authority, the power, and the budget to move the needle, and they get in the kind of hamster wheel. They don't get anywhere, and you can't do your job, so you go somewhere else. And so that's why we need to speak business ROI. What's the business ROI? What's the kind of revenue KPI we can get so that their CEO gets behind this. Because it's great to have HR folks involved and heads of diversity and inclusion involved. But if we don't have the commitment from the top, we're going to kind of bang our head against the wall. So that's why I always talk about diversity inclusion as a great business kind of enabler. But of course, there is the moral imperative, and I personally believe in the power of inclusion anyway. But in my workshops, because I speak to leaders, I use their language and I speak about ROI and innovation and revenue and productivity.
I suppose that's why your background is not necessarily HR. So you're thinking because obviously with the marketing side, you're thinking about what's the return on investment on the thing that we're doing, which is something actually I always think the HR profession in terms of can learn off other disciplines in terms of the measurability about some of the things that they're doing. Mm-hmm. Heidi, I'm intrigued about with ABB and the situation there, because obviously, did they sort of ask you to get involved just because they thought it was the right thing to do, or was there very much a business discussion at the time about, we should do this because it's the right thing? Did you go to them? Did they come to you? How did it what was the rationale, but for you moving from HR into this particular space?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's actually a very long one. Could take forever, but I will try to make it, sum it up. But historically, most of our initiatives were driven on a regional, local level, very much depending on the passion of our leaders and people in the specific markets. And when I was asked to take this role in 2018, I was very reluctant because I needed to see, just to Perrine's point, that we had the top management, the executive level commitment. Because without that, it's very difficult to drive this agenda. It needs to be driven and owned by the top management to be seen and to be really driven in all of the streams and become a DNA of the company. In January 2018, we signed off the first truly global ambitions with the Gender Diversity Ambitions 2020. And that was really the first global, let's say, targets that we had. We started lifting awareness, action, and we also started seeing progress. Slowly but steadily, but purely on the dimension of gender. And then, as those were coming to an end, we also saw the entrance of our new CEO, Björn Rosengren, the Swedish national, coming in at the top of the company. And he challenged us to say, when we are crafting the next, not 5-year strategy that we were used to, but the 10-year strategy, equally positioned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I would challenge you to think about inclusion and not about the various dimensions, gender, LGBTQ, etc., etc. So on June 24th, 2020, we actually signed off the Global Diversity and Inclusion Strategy 2030. And our CEO himself raised his hand to be the executive sponsor for gender. And we had also Maria Barcelona, who is our group general counsel and company secretary, did the same for the LGBTQ. And that was the first time we actually had a global agenda for the LGBTQ topic as well. And then we launched the full strategy internally, externally, with press releases and internal emails from our executive committee and so on, after the approval from the board. So I would say that, just linking back to what Perrine was saying, it is a business imperative to drive this agenda. It needs to be business driven. We will never succeed if this becomes an HR topic and we are ticking off a box of trainings. And how are we going to succeed doing that? At ABB, we created then a strategy based on 3 pillars. And I think that's very important for our people to understand also the framework that we have. The inclusive leadership and culture is one, making sure we enhance the behavioral aspects of our leaders and employees, who ultimately set the tone for our culture. Governance, making sure we have the structures in terms of processes, policies, and tools in place. And partnerships, making sure we leverage and maximize the effect of our initiatives through collaboration with relevant partners. So I think that's really important for us to understand and to have in place this framework of people to drive towards a common agenda. So yeah, it's very much owned by the top, but it's also equally driven by our people on the ground through our employee resource groups. So we have people connecting on common purpose and interests and creating solid employee resource groups. That is also driving our agenda forward in the markets on the ground. And that combination, I think, is critical for cultural change and progress.
Yeah. If I could add as well, I think, such excellent points from both Perrine and Heidi. And for me, simply the heart of making a business case sits ethical consideration. We live in a world where climate change is rife, where sustainability is talked about, but what creates sustainability when we're being ethically considerate, when businesses aren't just working for themselves, but they're working to enable the success of the communities within which they exist, of the people that they take on, of the experiences those people are having in their workplaces. And I think for me as well, what always surprises me is, yes, we see a lot of movement on gender, but why? Because unfortunately, EDI is still a space, diversity, inclusion, equity is still a space that is predominantly run by women who are not women of color. And so it's a very easy thing to pick up gender and make it work. And it's very easy to pick up LGBTQ after that, even though it struggles a lot more than gender, and take these very separate binary approaches. The difficulty is to lead from a race-led lens. Difficulty is to design global strategies and place, EDI outside of HR, straight under the CEO's office, with the CEO accountability, like Perrine and Heidi have said, because until CEOs take that accountability and they become personally responsible and they understand that they're ethically responsible, just like they are for health and safety and for compliance on legal and auditing and all of those things, that EDI is an equally important initiative, because it's not a project, like Heidi said. It is a long-term cultural fix. And until you get that inclusion piece right, and until you learn to take an intersectional view instead of working on siloed individual types of diversity initiatives, and until you pay your employee resource groups, and until you pay experts who belong to those particular identities and bring them in, your business case, will not come through. You will not be able to measure progress until you start looking at different ways of measuring progress. And all of that comes when you have diverse people in the room. Because otherwise, if everyone looks like you, whether you're people of color or otherwise, you're just going to replicate what you know. You're not going to really get any benefit from diversity or innovation.
Yeah.
One of the things that I was quite interested in about when you talked about the Chief Diversity Officer, and Sabah, if we had a candid conversation previously where you talked about how sometimes how draining it can be, sort of being the one person kind of really responsible for that in a different sort of space. And one of the things that made me think about, and I ran actually a poll on LinkedIn, just really to understand about whether well, I'll bring it up and I'll explain what the results are. So if you're listening on the podcast, you won't be able to see this. I'll kind of very quickly talk you through what it says, but those on video will be able to see this. I'll just quickly turn that banner off. So basically, the poll was around, do you think that HR teams and businesses should have dedicated diversity, equity, and inclusion specialists within them? And we had, in terms of the results, 57% said yes, that somebody needs to drive it, and 43% said that no, it's a total team effort. There was 195 votes, so you could assume that there was more votes. It would probably still be only just shaded by having a sort of specialist within there. So I suppose from the question going back there a little bit is, what are your thoughts about that in terms of, does it need to have a specialist person? Is this Chief Diversity Officer never going to really work? Does it have to come really from CEO and down into the company, or do you need that Chief Diversity Officer and those specialists within the business? It'd be great to get actually all of your opinions on it, because I don't know if they might be slightly different. So I don't know if if we can sort of go around in order. So perhaps Heidi, if you go first.
Yeah. So I'm very surprised by the poll, actually, because I believe that we need to have structures. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's really, of course, about the culture, the behaviors, what is driving psychological safety and inclusion forward. But that will not happen by itself. Of course, role modeling and all of that, but we need to have the structures. And in the structures needs to be driven by someone to enable and to facilitate. And that's where I think this role comes in play for a very important matter, ensuring the structures from the top, the connect to the ground with the ERGs, and of course, ensuring that we also measure and hold ourselves accountable. So this will not happen by itself, that we sit and hope that one day it will be so inclusive all over and equity will be, a natural thing for us. We need to have structures and it needs to be facilitated. That's why, yes, I completely agree. It's a team effort, but there needs to be a plan and we need to hold ourselves accountable. And it needs to be driven by the top and supported by the bottom and then become a team effort moving forward.
So you would have voted yes?
I would have, it's actually yes for both, but it cannot only be a team effort without having someone putting in place a strategy, structures, and facilitating the progress and the way forward.
Marine, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, do you know what? Actually, when I saw your poll, I was not surprised because myself, I would have said the same. I'll say 50-50. I can totally see the value of having an in-house, dedicated, full-time person who looks after solid diversity inclusion. There is a huge benefit to that. Like Heidi mentioned, there is clear structure. There is more buy-in from the team. There's more authority. There's more of a long-term commitment. It demonstrates the actual investment, right, into this. I can see that. At the same time, I can also see the benefit of having an external person for the accountability piece, because I always use the example of a personal trainer. Let me explain. Imagine you're trying to...
I think we might have lost Perrine there.
I hope you can still hear me. Okay.
Yeah, back. You were starting to talk about your gym.
Yeah, the accountability. I use this example because if you're trying to lose weight and become healthier and let's say lose weight, get healthier, get fitter, you can do it by yourself. Yes, you can. You can go to the gym by yourself and you can try and eat healthier. But if you have a personal trainer who's going to keep you accountable, you need to push harder, you need to lift heavier, you need to eat this, you don't need to eat that, you're going to get better results. And so it's the whole point around the accountability. Can you do it by yourself? Probably yes. Can you move the needle a bit? Probably yes. Can you do it as much as if you had someone external who kept you actually accountable? Probably not. So that my point. And also having someone external gives you that kind of benchmark, kind of insights from what other companies are doing. That external person who is working maybe with other organizations and, large and small and medium size, and it can give you, insider tips. This is what other people are doing. This is what other people are doing that's working. This is what other people are doing that's not working. So I guess the long story short, I actually think my answer is 50-50. I can see the value of having someone in-house, the influence, the authority, the budget, the power. I can also see the value of having someone external. So I think having both, if you can, as in a dedicated in-house and an external consultant, whoever, expert, I think that could work well.
But the poll was about having the team drive it, wasn't it, Leon?
Yeah, it was about, do you need a dedicated person for it?
Or not at all?
Or should it just be in the company, as in, led by a HR director or CHRO or something like that, or the CEO?
I think it helps to have one person kind of who is driving that, for sure, because otherwise you dilute a little bit, who is responsible. It's not clear. It's not really clear, like who does what. And then if it's not clear, things don't really happen. So having a dedicated person, yes, for sure.
Okay. Sabah?
Yeah, I think I lean towards Heidi's definition. I think from what Perrine said, I absolutely see the value of bringing in external people, but for doing very specific activities. And I think, Heidi, you spoke about this earlier, having good governance frameworks and structures, you inbuilt it into your policy, into your strategic approach. And that's really important, being intentional. Because one of the challenges with having a person in HR is that it doesn't get embedded in all the systems and it doesn't get embedded in everybody's roles and thinking, unless you have an HR director or a CHRO who intentionally builds inclusion, builds accountabilities into every system, into every job description, into the way they work, into culture, and so on. So I kind of lean towards, yes, you do need people. I think the 43% are definitely an idealist group, and I'm certainly an idealist at heart. But it absolutely needs to be a team effort, but it needs to be driven by somewhere, and that person needs to have a resource team and work within structures that allow them to influence for change. And I think that those are points that Perrine and Heidi have previously brought up, so I would reinforce that that's absolutely key.
Can I ask about, in terms of with yours, because I know you've worked with a few organisations, so were they normally in consulting aspects, or were you normally employed to look after this sort of space?
I've worked in both capacities.
Okay.
So race equality work I've done in more embedded 1 year long projects. I would have stayed longer, but one of the issues with how HR continues, not everybody, but a lot of HR teams still continue to look at equity creation work and inclusion culture change work as project based, and they hire resources on a project basis, and they hire them as fillers for teams that are there or not there. So no, it's always challenging when you go into a project, but I enjoy the embedding. In terms of doing consultancy based work, very often my clients will start with, oh, can we do a project? Can we just do like training and train our leadership, and we'll just do a workshop for half a day, and I have to sort of walk them through why inclusion cannot be resolved through training and workshops in one day. That comes right at the end. Let's start with really where are you at and understanding where your gaps are. And if HR directors can be brought on side to understand that they themselves very often need upskilling, and that inclusion doesn't get treated like a sub-strategy and an add-on, then those organizations will see benefit from bringing a consultant or bringing a role that embeds, even if it's for a short period of time. It's how that role is allowed to work, Is it allowed to influence for change, or is it brought in a junior position, dumped with a lot of work, and given some unreasonable goals to achieve them? And predominantly with race work, this is a challenge.
Yeah, I like that point, Sabah. Just jumping in there, sorry, Leon, because I think that's a very important point. I've been approached by several companies to say, oh, we want to learn, how did you manage? What have you been doing? We see a lot of progress the past 2 years and so on. And with one company, I love to share. I think we are here to share because, collectively, we will move faster forward. And a couple of companies, I was speaking to them, and the person in front of me was actually the assistant of the CHRO who was on a project. I said, you will never succeed if this is how you position this topic as a project with the assistant. Forget about it. So it's really, important also to put the power in this position if you want to succeed. If not, there is no. It's a very small chance that you will succeed.
Yeah, I think Perrine, you said, I heard something you said on another podcast that you did about deprioritization of it, and if you don't put it at the top, and that sort of rings true with what Heidi was saying. One of the things I'm quite interested about, so if let's say you're a HR leader now and you're in an organization, let's say it's not a very big organization, 500 employees or 1,000 employees or something like that, how would they assess how inclusive their organization, like where do you start? If you think, well, if they watch this show and go, yeah, we need to do more, there's a real business case, I've missed this, we need to look into this, right, what do I start with? Where do they start to assess what they're doing now to know what they can potentially implement to make any changes? What should they do? Anyone?
I think to measure inclusion is, of course, a challenge. And I would say in global organizations like ABB, we are doing it through the engagement survey. So we actually have the annual survey. We have 3 questions around inclusion. So there it's really an opportunity to deep dive into that. If I was running a smaller company, I would do the pulse surveys, and I would do it on a much more regular basis. And it wouldn't be 50 questions survey once per year. It would be a couple of questions, testing the pulse every Friday or every second Friday. And that could be at least an indicator. Then, of course, we have the retention, we have the sick leaves, we have those more KPIs that you can evaluate that will give us some let's say, tracking on where we stand.
Okay.
I would say absolutely right, as Heidi said, and just to add on to that, you do start with the data you have. Very often I'll find HR directors reaching out to me and going, well, I'm completely lost. We actually don't track this data. So what do I do? So while you're answering your own questions there, you start with what you don't know and start asking yourself, what is the data that I'm not seeing? What am I blinded to? What are my own biases? What is different to me and perhaps something I've not experienced that I don't know of? What don't I know? And that's a really good place to start. What don't I know? Start with your data, quantitative. If you don't have qualitative data, start to gather it. You can do focus groups, you can do listening exercises, you can do facilitated external consultants coming in and doing some of the more challenging conversations for you. You can, if you don't have employee resource groups, you can actually form independently voiced employee resource groups, actually give them money to do their work, actually start putting them into strategic spaces intentionally to start listening while you build, say, your quantitative data gathering systems, or you build an HRIS system, or you're doing, so you can do things in parallel. But it's really about starting to go and really assess, like how you would with any problem, right? Assess what you know, what you don't know, and then ask some of the questions that you wouldn't actually ask. But do this listening. Come to forums like this. Reach out to the people after the forum. We all want to share, and as Heidi said, when we come together and share our different ideas, we're learning through this conversation. So imagine what you could get if you were an HR director and you either engaged with somebody that was completely different to you, or somebody that worked in a completely different space and has that experience and brings you the tech or other experience into it. You would come up with very different solutions. So I'd say those are good places potentially to also consider starting.
Yeah. Okay. So you've sort of measured your and you think, okay, we need to do some more then. What steps do you take? So we talked about these sort of pulse and how we might measure it, but what kind of proactive interventions could you make? Pareen, perhaps you could explain some of the things that you've done with some of your clients and some of the businesses that you've worked with and what you've advised them to do. Is it just sort of unconscious bias training and just looking at sort of some of the structures, how they recruit? Like, what kinds of things should they, could they do?
Yeah, absolutely. The first step I always start with when any organization is starting to think about how do we go about creating a diversity and inclusion program. I always start with number one, understand why diversity and inclusion is important to you, and even before that, what does diversity and inclusion means to you, to your organization? Because we talked about it at the start. What does diversity and inclusion means to you in your organization? Because to one organization, it might mean we need more gender diversity. We're an all-male organization. There is male everywhere. We want more gender diversity. To another organization, it might be we need more ethnic diversity. We are just white everywhere. We live in a city of London where 40% of the population is non-white. We need to change that. To another organization, it might be we need more disabled individuals because maybe they believe in inclusion. Maybe they might be selling products for disabled individuals, etc. Right? So start by defining what is diversity and inclusion to you. And then once you've done that, understand why diversity and inclusion is important to your organization. Is it because you think you're going to better serve diverse communities and clients? Is it because you think it's going to help you sell new market, to new market? Is it because you think it's going to help you deliver better innovation? Whatever the reason, you need to articulate the why. Why is it important? Because if you don't articulate the why, things are not really going to follow through. And so write it down and then revisit your mission statement. Now, I don't mean you need to write a 10-page document about your mission statement, but articulate in a few words in your mission statement what diversity and inclusion means to you and why it's important to your organization, right? Those are the fundamentals. And then start by setting goals, setting diverse, clear, measurable diversity goals that are tied to monetary compensation. I believe that if we set goals and we say within the next 12 months, we want to increase our female in leadership and reach 50% female in our leadership team. And then you reward with, I believe, monetary incentives, because what gets measured gets done, and what gets monetary compensated gets done even faster. So the same way you would reward a sales manager for achieving their sales target, you should reward executives for achieving their diversity goals, like Starbucks is doing, like Nike is doing, like McDonald's is doing, like all the big brands are doing. And then I think you should appoint, we talked about a diversity task force. I think if you could appoint a diversity and inclusion task force or committee sponsored by an executive to drive this project forward, to move the needle, to check every week, how are we progressing, to really keep that accountability. And then you need to get real about your own diversity and inclusion. make a list of the last 10 promotions in your organization, make a list of the last 10 new hires in your organization, make a list of the last 10 people whose efforts you acknowledge in your last team meeting. Do you notice any commonality, any pattern? It is the same kind of group, right? And then we talked about engagement survey, like Heidi talked about that. It could be a very simple 3 questions that you send every week to your team. I am proud to work for ABC company, or I would recommend ABC company as a great place to work, or I rarely think about looking for a job at another company. Employees rate 1 to 10, and you get a quick pulse to see how people feel engaged or not. So those are kind of steps that any organizations can take to start with their diversity and inclusion programs.
Yes, it's very interesting. One of my clients, it's actually in the tech space, Pari, which obviously I know is where you've obviously come from. And a lot of what I've been doing with them in terms of staff, I don't know how many roles I've placed with them now, but they talked quite a lot about the shortlist in terms of particularly around sort of the gender side of things, because they have, a sort of issue. It's not very diverse as they'd like to be, particularly in that area. And very, very interesting in terms of with their HR leadership and how they're looking at things. And then their L&D person was rolling out a mentoring program, but it was all through the lens of diversity and inclusion, and everything from disability all the way, age, and absolutely everything was covered within this piece. And she showed me some of the bits that they'd done. I just thought it was really, really fantastic and really sort of good work that they were doing in terms of that. So in terms of, one of the things that's come up for me, I'm a big football fan, and there's a big thing around obviously Black Lives Matters, and there's guys doing knees and what have you before the matches. And Sabah, this is a question really in your direction, because there seems to be, certainly when you're looking through the lens of football, still an issue with racism. And I know this is obviously an area that you are really strongly tackling in terms of from a sort of professional workplace perspective. How should organizations tackle racism within the workplace? Because those people must, I assume, be in the workplace as well, that are doing things, in their sort of private lives as well. How would an organization tackle something like that?
You're probably going to need another hour and a half for me to answer that one.
Sorry,
but
it's another show.
No, it's a great question. It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. Racism has always existed. It's just that it's much more visible now. We live in a century where we're much better connected. We're constantly improving on what we can see, what we can track, what we can hear, what's made visible to us. So how can organizations tackle racism? Well, a great place to start would be to acknowledge that it exists, because this is one of the biggest issues we face and we know this from several reports, several bits of research that are done. We are not diverse in terms of our leadership at the top. We're even less diverse when it comes to Black leaders, Asian leaders. There's a tendency to hire for model minority, based myths, and on that basis. So there's a lot of bias in hiring. There's a lot of bias in, how our systems are designed, of who gets progressed, who gets looked at as talent, how is talent understood. And one of the best places to start is to start to look at who are you excluding, why are you excluding them, and do you accept that this exclusion is a result of your action, complicit, known, intentional, unintentional, or otherwise. Because if you can start to accept as leaders, whether you're HR, you're a CEO, you're a senior leader in an organization, if you can start to first accept that yes, racism exists, yes, we're institutionally racist, yes, we have systemic issues that prevent the progress of some people because of their skin color, and within that we have nuances of some which are more marginalized, and 99.9% always tends to be a Black community member, even with a class intersection. So yes, we have white working class issues as well, but let's find the most marginalized, the most excluded, and let's first accept we have an issue. Now we accept we have an issue. What are we going to do about it? Are we the most qualified to find solutions for this? Or should we actually pay and hire the right people, not out of being tokenistic, but get the right experts in, get a combination of skill sets in across a diverse group of people, understand where they're going to come and guide you with systemic changes, with analyzing your policies, analyzing your approach, analyzing your mindsets, helping you unravel how is my decision making happening? Because your decision making as a senior white leader is having an impact. If you are intentional and you're an accomplice and a co-conspirator of change and you're not a performative white ally, you will know the difference. But most white leaders, well, are probably not prioritizing for ADI. And if they are, they need a lot of help doing it. So are you going to get somebody that comes from diverse backgrounds to help you solve the issue? And that includes white racial group individuals. Yes, it includes a diverse group of people. Find them, work hard, pay them fairly, give them time to help you solve a problem, because this is not a project-based issue. This is a 5 to 10 year long-term issue. So get together, understand progression, retention, success, and development. Where are my issues? Start with that. Start with your structure, systems, and policies. Analyze them for exclusion. Take the lens of exclusion to understand where you are including, where you're not, who you're excluding, what are the intersections with disability, with LGBT, with gender, and flip it on its head. Instead of going at it from a gender and from a different lens, you'll find that how we look and how we sound intersects with everything. I have 8 of 9 protected characteristics that are listed on the Equality Act. You can't tell that by looking at me. But if you listen to me, and if I was in spaces to influence, your strategic committees who develop strategies, or I was in a room where a CEO actually listened and wanted to learn, you would probably get very different solutions, because I'm coming as an external person, or I'm from within your company and you're actually giving me space to voice what I see and experience every day doesn't work for me, which hinders my progress, hinders my ability to make more revenue for you. So listening, learning, inviting difference in, and with humility and with acceptance that something is not right. Let's not question that racism exists or not. Let's accept that it does. Let's start with that, with belief. And let's try and see what we're going to do about it. But we don't know everything, and we're going to get people of color in and help us figure that out. And we're going to pay them fairly for their time and long-term engagements.
I'm very conscious of time, but there's a question that I'm really keen to get across, because it was actually a question that was put to me around the pandemic and sort of the impacts really of the pandemic, and not just necessarily the pandemic in terms of the impact. I mean, things like in the UK, they published gender pay that said that it's widened. We've had lots in terms of disadvantaged groups, minority groups, etc., that have been mostly affected in terms of the workplace more. And obviously women in terms of, for example, with hybrid working. And I think there was a stat like 3 times more likely to be working from home. And then there's does that affect their career prospects and things like that? I suppose just bringing it right up to sort of October 2021, as we are now, and where we are with the world. What if we accept that ED&I has gone backwards slightly because of the pandemic, what should organizations be doing in this kind of new post-ish pandemic world? Is it the same stuff? Is it different? Do we need to be doing something different now? Anyone would like to come in on that question?
I can jump in quickly on that one. I think as we are currently living the new normal, or the next normal, as we're saying, I think we have seen, of course, a huge toll taken by the less privileged groups, absolutely. But I also think we can take some learnings away with us moving forward. And I think for the flexibility, suddenly we're sitting here having a panel. It's every interaction I have is now naturally with the camera on. I completely interact with the entire teams across time zones and countries on a regular basis and on a daily basis. And I think that is also going to support our journey a bit, because we don't have to mobilize. For those who cannot travel or go into the office and so on, it will also open up the opportunities and also widen the talent pool. So I think we can see some benefits that we should take with us, but of course we need to also acknowledge the damage caused by the pandemic and try to instantly and with urgency solve it.
Okay. Pareen, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think completely agree. As always, it's the most underprivileged group that have suffered the most during COVID. You know, women, people of color, disabled individuals, younger, older workers, etc. So that's the same as usual in a crisis. They're the groups that suffer most. But I think we can use this as an opportunity to press the reset button and start new. So I love the idea, the image of let's press the reset button and let's start not as we were doing before, but not go back to how it was before, but let's press the reset button and how we're going to do things differently this time around. So I think the good thing is that COVID has opened people's eyes to inequalities and the need for more inclusion, diversity in the workplace. As we've seen, chief diversity officers, roles have gone through the roof, which is a good thing. So let's leverage that momentum. Let's leverage that momentum that's happening and just and amplify the message and keep those conversations and keep talking about having those hard conversations, because that's what's going to move the needle. So I think we can use this to our advantage and really move things even to a place where it's better than where it was before.
Just
Excellent.
to support, thanks, Leon. Just to support Heidi and Perrine's comments, I think we need to get bolder. We need to embrace a hybrid working. We need to embrace flexibility. We need to, as particularly I implore HR directors, let go of presenteeism, let go of promoting based on who is most visible, who you see most, who's in your networks, who you know of as talent. Change your definition. Talent has been sitting under your nose all the time. People with depression, anxiety have prospered being able to work from home. Mothers with children have prospered being able to take some time out here and there and manage their chores around the house while still being able to, be on calls and not having to leave jobs, not having to feel forced to choose between family and between their careers. And everyone struggled in very different ways. So I'm hoping that if anything, we learn that it is possible to function in hybrid and flexible ways. Not every role needs to be front-facing. Not every role needs to be, deemed as being productive if it's operating from, an office space and a table in front of your manager. I think managers need to stop being so hung up on control. Like, if they trust their teams are going to deliver for them. There's bigger companies, as Perrine's mentioned, as Heidi's mentioned, global companies who've been doing this for decades. So the bulk of us may not actually sit in those global companies, and we need to learn from other sectors and other companies. We need to learn these practices, and we need to educate ourselves. And that education, unfortunately, does sit with leaders who have this position of responsibility. Let's change the leadership model. Let's make it the servant leadership model, because that works better. And HR directors, please don't, please be kinder to your employees. Like, you can be flexible, you can still get the work done. Don't worry so much about it. Stop being so risk averse and start taking some risks. And allowing different things to happen and evolve. Like, trust in this process. COVID has set us on inadvertently. Like, let's see where this can take us. So try something different.
And I want to add one small piece on this one, because prior to the pandemic, we were working on the flexible working practices. Very, very important in terms of driving inclusion forward, that we are flexible and that we are seen as a flexible employer. And I can tell you, we met some resistance, and we had to push, and there were pushback. But with the pandemic, overnight, everyone suddenly had to work remotely, and it worked. It was fantastically well working. People were productive, committed, and dedicated. And I think that's a learning also from, let's say, that stereotype of saying, if I don't see you, you don't work. That has been proven wrong. And that is something to take with us moving forward, and really to now embrace the flexibility that we need to see.
Fantastic. Well, that's we need to sort of move on really in terms of to our two lies and one truth, because we've got to get through and find out which of the ones are true. So what we'll do is, if we go through them all again, and then we'll sort of vote, as it were, which ones we think is the truth. So Heidi, I think you started first, didn't you? Do you want to remind us of your three?
I can do so. So number 1, I participated in Olympic Games in Lillehammer, 1994. 2, my origins are from the US. And 3, I have lived in 10 different countries.
Okay. Perrine, which one do you think is the truth?
It's a hard one. You have to be part of the Olympics because it's too specific to not be true. So you must have been part of the Olympics. And then I think you have lived in 10 different countries. So yeah, that's what I think.
It's only one truth.
Oh, one truth. God, I thought it was 2 truths. Okay, so the one truth is the Olympics. It's the Olympics.
Sabah?
Same vote. I think it's the Olympics.
See, I'm going to go slightly differently because I thought it'd be the Olympics, but I'm just going to go for origin in the US just because of your name.
Wow, that was a nice one. Should I reveal the truth now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so of course it was a tricky question with my last name, but I'm not of US origin.
Oh.
And I did not live in 10 countries, only 5. But I did participate in the Olympics in Lillehammer in 1994, but only showcasing the official outfits. I was not an athlete.
Oh, okay. I thought you were like a bobsleigh person or something. Wow.
Or a skier.
Yeah, definitely skier.
Wow. That's cool. That's really cool. Excellent. So, Perrine, yours were next up. So, are you saying 2 truths?
First off, I get it wrong because clearly I get it wrong because I say 2 truths. Of course,
you're not the first to do this and get it wrong.
Okay. So I gave 2 truths and 1 lie. I made it easier for you. So my 2 truths and 1 lie, because I get it wrong, were I am a bodybuilder, I am a vegan who does not drink alcohol, and I speak fluent Russian.
So we've got to figure out the 1 lie, right, for you. I'm. Go on, Heidi. You go first.
You saw I was very eager to put my my 1 fault out. Yeah. I haven't seen you live. I haven't met you in person, but I would go with the bodybuilder piece being a lie and the 2 others being truth.
Sabah?
Yeah, I mean, you could be I don't want to judge you on that. Like, why couldn't you be a bodybuilder? But,
it's a psychologically safe space. Hosts of HR always is, don't worry.
I'm thinking maybe the bodybuilder. Not sure.
I think that's I could imagine you sort of lifting some weights and stuff actually. Because what I've noticed is a lot of bodybuilding women aren't necessarily very big. They're quite often very lean. And you look quite lean, Perrine, although we've also not met.
You've been evaluated here now.
What was the last one again about the Russian?
That I speak fluent Russian.
I think it's the fluent Russian. I think that is the lie.
So you are correct, Leon. I do not speak fluent Russian. That was a complete lie. But the rest is true. The rest is true. I'm not a professional bodybuilder. I'm not, not professional. I do it as a hobby. And I am vegan and I do not drink alcohol. There you go. Fantastic.
Excellent. Wow. So I never get them right, by the way. So it's a real sort of, I'm really excited. It's going to be me for the rest of the week. I actually got one right. Normally terrible. So Sabah, your 3, if you could remind us.
I said I have mixed heritage. I'm studying for a career transition and I'm related to a famous politician.
Only one of them is true.
Related to a famous politician.
Married to a famous politician.
No, related.
Related, yeah.
Go on then, Heidi, Perrine. So, and yours is only 1 truth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think the truth is that you are related to a famous politician.
Heidi?
Yeah, same here.
That's a full house. I think that's the most random one.
I wish. No, I'm a very humble person. I am just a constant worker bee and I'm constantly working to evolve myself. So I am working full time, I am volunteering, and I'm studying for a career transition into becoming a counseling psychologist, hopefully one day, and applying all my HR inclusion knowledge into helping people in that space.
Cool. Oh, so leaving us
Always
potentially in
wrong. Oh
HR. Yeah, leaving us in HR. Oh, good luck to you.
I'm hoping to stay in that space, but maybe more
Yeah,
counseling HR folk who might need it, especially as
yeah,
inclusion takes a bit more speed. It's not an easy place to work in as an HR professional,
no,
as a leader. So,
no.
yeah, I'm hoping to help people come what may in any capacity.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us. In terms of, it's been great to have your input on that. And for those that are viewing live or viewing on the recording or listening on the podcast, thank you also for tuning in with us. Our next show will be on the 10th of October, and we're going to be discussing how HR can best drive company performance. So please do join us then. But for now, thank you very much and goodbye.